So usually I try to do the videos in a very analytic, impartial manner. I don't think pure objectivity can ever be done, but for the most part, I don't get too partisan in the videos unless I state it up front. And this is one where I will be fairly partisan. I want to be very clear. I have not seen The Whale in totality, so this is not a film review. And gonna be defending Brendan basically because although Brendan's performance is getting pretty universal acclaim, there's a lot of criticism from various critics, left, right, small critics, big critics, that something is off about The Whale. Now, The Whale is getting a lot of pretty strong praise, so let's get into the basics. I don't want to spoil too much. I've already been spoiled in a few plot points, so I will be very minimal. So, what is The Whale? Well, essentially, it's based on a play that is focused on, yes, an obese man called Charlie, who is being played by Brendan Fraser. And let's just say that he is insanely obese. So just moving around is very painful. He's suffering from these traumas and phobias that the movie gets into in his backstory. I will say you have to be ready for a lot, and I do mean a lot of graphic imagery, not just sexual or physical, but we're getting a lot of shots of just food being stuffed into his mouth. So it will be a very, very visceral experience, whether you go for it or not. It is overall a very sad film, but there are definitely moments of hope and optimism. So we're seeing Charlie in a very low, low point after he suffers one particular tragedy, and how his family and people around him are coming into his life, and he's been given a very stern warning that he has to get medical help. If he does not get it immediately, he will die. And the drama centers around whether he will make the choice to save himself or let himself die, basically eat himself to death. And that is the central drama of The Whale. So, what is the problem? Well, apparently, some critics, again, not all, but some critics are very, very down on this film, giving it a very low score. Some reasons I think are legitimate, some of them I think are, frankly, bizarre and stupid. So let's get to the stupid criticisms, namely that Brendan Fraser did put on a lot of pounds, but he's not technically a fat person. He's not obese. And technically speaking, there is a lot of work with makeup, although it's very, very impressive. And he did put in a huge committed physical performance. But a lot of people don't think it's right for him to just put on, quote, a fat suit and play an obese man. I think that's being really stupid and silly. Again, I don't want to get too personal. I'm dealing with weight issues, not like that level, and I've dealt with trauma in my life. So I think it's just a little weird to say you cannot portray this or that person. I think that's very dangerous to limit people like that. And apparently, they did take a lot of time to research obesity, but some people think they're exploiting obesity. I can't speak as an obese person, but I don't sense that. Why would they do that? It seems kind of a false charge. And then they get into how manipulative the story is, which is, well, that is what cinema is. Cinema is very manipulative, so I'm not quite clear why they feel shocked that they're trying to manipulate your emotions. That is something that Darren does in a lot of his films, so not quite getting the complaint there either. And I would agree there is something problematic in the way it's being marketed because it is definitely polarizing people that if you like Brendan Fraser and you grew up with him with the 1990s and the 2000s, his more famous films, you're going to like this performance. Very central to this film. He's in it a huge amount. So a lot is riding on his performance and how you feel about him. And I agree that's a little bit iffy to basically appeal to the emotions of the audience in terms of the actor who has suffered also a lot of tragedy and is recovering. And it's pretty awful what's happened to him, both physically, mentally, and emotionally. So I can't help but say I do sympathize with him. I haven't enjoyed all the Brendan Fraser films, of course, but definitely when he's a very good actor. He is really, really strong and probably is very underrated. But I do have some quibbles about this or that film, personally. And then we get into the more legitimate criticisms, which is even though this is a film, it is basically a play on film. And even though Aronofsky does in a few places make it cinematic, we're being confined to just a few locations. A lot of the film is just Charlie's apartment. So if you want to see a very expansive, very experimental film with a lot of interesting camera angles and just a ton of tricks that he usually does in other films, this is not the film for you. It is going to be very confined to few spaces apparently is well done, but basically a play on film. And it is apparently very faithful to the play, but some people felt it was really lacking. They wanted a much more pure cinematic experience. Darren Aronofsky, I think, did that a little bit too much in his first early films. So him pulling back on quote, the cinematic experience, I think, is actually pretty interesting and balanced. If you're just coming into Darren Aronofsky for the first time, this will be a little jarring of why he didn't do quote more with the camera. I'm very positive on The Whale. I believe the positive critics. I think the negative critics are nitpicking and frankly being nonsensical, but there are a few drawbacks to The Whale, and I've concentrated on Brendan Fraser because apparently the other performances are very erratic, so they may not work for you. Everyone is doing their best work. It's a very talented cast, but it is basically very much Brendan Fraser in this apartment within a limited space, and we're going through his turmoil and despair. So that's something you're willing to look at, then yes, I recommend The Whale. If that feels a little too limited, yeah, The Whale may not be for you. And there we are.